All right, next up we have the thyroid and parathyroid glands. These ones are pretty fun. The thyroid gland is going to be responsible for regulating the metabolic rate of the body and has a role in calcium homeostasis. This is going to be composed of follicles that are filled with a triiodothyronine, which is going to contain 3 iodine atoms, and thyroxine, which contains 4 iodine atoms. So iodine is going to be incredibly important to the appropriate performance of the thyroid gland. If iodine is lacking in the diet, the thyroid cannot produce the thyroid hormones. Low levels of thyroid hormones increases the secretion of thyroid-stimulating hormone. So an example of a homeostatic imbalance would be endemic goiter. This is causes the enlarged thyroid from an increased levels of thyroid-stimulating hormone. So that TSH, that thyroid-stimulating hormone, we keep sending more and more hormone to the thyroid. We keep stimulating the thyroid, keep producing more and more thyroid-stimulating hormone. It's enlarging the thyroid, but the thyroid is not actually able to move any faster. It's not actually able to process the thyroid hormones without iodine. So thyroid hormones increases the metabolic rate, but they do not really have a target organ. They stimulate cells all over the body to metabolize faster. Congenital hypothyroidism is what happens when you have an underdeveloped thyroid at birth. This results in the undersecretion of thyroid hormone. Unless thyroid therapy is begun in the first 2 months of life, it can result in some intellectual disabilities. Myxedema is another example of a homeostatic imbalance associated with the thyroid. This is hypothyroidism in adults. There are a couple of symptoms like lethargy, weight gain, loss of hair, slower pulse, lowered body temperature. This can be treated with the administration of thyroid hormones to help restore normal function. Exothalamic goiter or hyperthyroidism is what happens when you have an oversecretion of the thyroid hormone. The thyroid becomes overactive and enlarges, forming a goiter. Typically, this will result in eyes protruding from edema in the eye socket tissues. You'll tend to see symptoms like hyperactivity, nervousness, irritability. Treatment is usually the surgical removal or destruction of a portion of the thyroid by radioactive iodine to help bring that activity, to bring that back into check. Calcitonin is another very important hormone released by the thyroid gland. It's going to be responsible for helping to maintain blood calcium levels. So when calcium levels rise, calcitonin is going to be secreted. Calcium ions have a very important role in nervous conduction, muscle contraction, and blood clotting. So it's very important that we have calcium in the bloodstream. But if there is too much calcium in the blood, it can have a negative effect. So that's when calcitonin is secreted. Calcitonin brings about the deposition of calcium into the bones. It also reduces the activity and the number of osteoclasts. If you remember way on back when we talked about the skeletal system, we talked about osteoblasts and osteoclasts. Osteoblasts build up the bone by absorbing calcium out of the bloodstream and using that to deposit into the bone. And osteoclasts release calcium by breaking down the bone. So they'll break down the bone and they'll release that calcium into the bloodstream. Once those blood calcium levels lower back to normal, the release of calcitonin is inhibited. So when we have too much calcium, the thyroid gland secretes calcitonin into the blood. The calcitonin absorbs that calcium out of the blood, deposits it in the bone, and it lowers the calcium level in the bloodstream. Once it's brought down in check, once we bring that back down, we've attained homeostasis, and the thyroid gland shuts off. It stops producing that calcitonin. Next up, we have the parathyroid glands. Now, the parathyroid glands are going to produce parathyroid hormone. Now, the parathyroid hormone is going to play on the opposite side of the seesaw as calcitonin. This is going to be responsible for lowering blood calcium levels. It's going to be responsible for increasing blood calcium levels in response to low blood calcium levels, okay? So sorry that was a little confusing, but if you come over here, when the blood calcium gets too high, the thyroid gland secretes calcitonin and brings that blood calcium back down. If the blood calcium gets too low, this is where we're going to see parathyroid hormone kick in. So this is going to be released in response to low blood calcium levels. It's going to promote the activity of osteoclasts, which are going to remove the calcium from the bones and increase the blood calcium levels. It's also going to activate vitamin D, which is calcitrol, also known as calcitrol, which can promote calcium reabsorption by the kidneys and stimulates the absorption of calcium ions from the food. So these effects bring the blood calcium level back into the normal range. And then once we're back into the normal range, the PTH hormone, the parathyroids stop secreting the parathyroid hormone. So they help kind of keep that in check. Now, there are a couple of homeostatic imbalances associated with the parathyroid glands, like hypoparathyroidism. Hypo, meaning under, we have an underperformance of the parathyroid glands. We're not producing enough PTH. This can cause a what would happen, actually? Let me throw that out there for you. What would happen if we were not producing enough parathyroid hormone? Without enough parathyroid hormone, we're going to see a huge drop in blood calcium. So there's not going to be enough calcium in the blood. If there's not enough calcium in the blood, what sort of effects would that have? Why do we care about calcium in the blood? Well, calcium plays a very important role in nerve excitability, or plays a very important role in stimulating and inhibiting nerve conduction. The problem is if we don't have enough calcium in the blood, we're going to end up with excessive nerve excitability. The increased nerve signals can cause tetany, or a continuous contraction of those muscles, so your muscles will start to seize up. Now, without treatment, this could eventually cause seizures, heart failure, even death. So it's very important that we keep that parathyroid hormone in check, because we need to help maintain appropriate blood calcium levels. Hyperparathyroidism. Hyperparathyroidism is caused by the oversecretion of the parathyroid hormone. What do you suppose would be the effects of oversecreting parathyroid hormone? Well, if we're producing too much parathyroid hormone, we might end up with osteoporosis, because we're continuously increasing calcium levels. We're continually removing calcium from the bones, and it may result in osteoporosis, where we have not enough calcium in the bones will start to become porous. It could also cause kidney stones, which is a buildup of those calcium crystals inside of the kidneys. So this could be quite unpleasant. All right, and that's it for this section. You should be able to explain how the hormones of the thyroid gland influence the metabolic rate, and you should definitely be able to talk through the balance between calcitonin and parathyroid hormones and how they work together to help regulate that blood calcium levels. We didn't really spend much time on it, but maybe talk a little bit or spend a little bit of time to see if you can write down, come up with what are some of the differences and similarities between hyperthyroidism and hyperparathyroidism with regard to the effects of the body. So what would happen when you have an overactive thyroid versus an overactive parathyroid? All right, please let me know if you have any questions.